I'm trying to record something here, bro.
Difficulty in video games is something that's largely based on, subjective elements. So it's harder to really argue, the good and bad in like an objective manner, as opposed to if you were to, critique the depth of a combat system or how realistic a game looks. So while a lot of what I'll talk about in this video is going to be pretty subjective to me, I still do believe that difficulty in video games is something that matters a lot. And I don't know, maybe some of you will agree on why I think this is the case in the way I will explain it and how it can heavily impact your enjoyment of a game. But speaking of difficulty in games, have you ever wanted to make a game more challenging or even more convenient? Well, let me introduce you to the sponsor of today's video, Wand. Now, I've mentioned Wand in one of my past videos where I talked about mods for Spider-Man 2 and explained why I like them in that video. Wand automatically detects your installed games, so there's no setup needed and they work instantly with one click. And unlike many other modifications for games, you don't have to like restart your game. These things just work on the fly. It can be used whenever, wherever for more than 3,500 games. You just press Alt-W to bring up the in-game overlay and turn on the assist that you want. Using Wand for Spider-Man 2, I paired the no cooldown and infinite gadget assist with another difficulty adjustment tool, and it just made the combat even more enjoyable without compromising the combat engagement that you get already from the game. Or let's say you're playing like Elden Ring and you want to, change your build or just make the game less difficult. Well, they also have options like giving you how many runes you want so that you can change your build whenever you want, or you can just simply edit your stats however you want. So if you're like me and you like to experiment with the games that you like, and you also like to convenience yourself and avoid tedious things within games, then you can download Wand using my link, wand.gg/collinsworld, or you can just click the link in the description. Thank you to Wand for sponsoring this video. But to start this video off, I'm going to be talking about the different kinds of things in video games that can add difficulty. Obviously, there's all different kinds of games out there, but I do feel that no matter what game you're playing, they all need to meet a certain level of engagement in order to make the experience enjoyable. And I think that engagement and, difficulty both go hand in hand with each other. But the different kinds of gameplay loops that I'm going to be using as my examples is combat, stealth, exploration, puzzles, and platforming. These are featured in many different games that I play, and depending on how well they're designed, they are also what separates, the good from the great games, or the good from the average, mediocre, or even just straight up bad. And before I get into the first section of this video, I do just want to disclaim that this video is very broadly focused. It's not specific, even though I will talk about individual games. I'm not going to be getting into the nitty gritty with them. So if I do talk about a certain category of a thing, my opinion may vary on it a bit, if it was to be discussed, because again, I'm not here to be nuanced about every little game that I talk about. I'm more just being kind of broad. But with that said, let's start by talking about combat and stealth and what makes good difficulty and engagement in those situations. First, let's talk about stealth because I think it's probably the easiest out of the two. And for my 3 shining examples of the best stealth games that I've played, and I do just want to disclaim, I haven't played a lot of stealth games, so if you're gonna ask, well, why isn't this game here? This guy doesn't have Metal Gear on his list. It's I haven't played it, bro. Relax. But regardless of that, I have Batman Arkham Knight, Splinter Cell Blacklist, and The Last of Us 2. I have all these games up here because I think that they excel in all of the core things that I think makes up a good, engaging, and fun stealth system. The first thing is obviously good enemy AI, and I think this is the most important thing when it comes to making a stealth game. AI that reacts to your tactics and responds accordingly. Basically, the closer they feel to real people is how your AI should be. And the second thing is creativity. This can be done by allowing the player to have, a variety of ways to take out enemies and interact with them in the environment as well. But these two things together done well can make any stealth game really feel or maybe, stealth encounter within a game or within a stealth focused game. But it can make any one of those feel like a puzzle that needs to be figured out and can also be solved in many different ways. And I talked about this before when I made a video about why I think The Last of Us 2 has really good gameplay and why I like it better than the first game. But some bad examples of stealth, and mind you, these games aren't really stealth focused necessarily, but I would say Spider-Man 2 and Miles Morales and a lot of the Assassin's Creed games. And the reason I would say that these are bad or mediocre stealth systems is because, for one, the enemy AI tends to be really stupid. Whether it be not really detecting sound like they should, not really stopping your tactics, and just not having a lot of tools to really play around with. Whereas, let's say in, Spider-Man PS4, that game has a lot of gadgets that can make stealth really fun due to the creativity element. But it does still have the same enemy AI problems as the other two Spider-Man games. So while I would say that Spider-Man PS4 still has a pretty mediocre stealth system due to the enemy AI, making it not feel very engaging, because even though it's got creativity, there's no challenge that really makes it feel like a puzzle, or something that really makes you need to be like patient or really have to use your brain. But again, I still wouldn't say it's explicitly a bad stealth system just because it has creativity to supplement it. And to further get across what I mean when I say that difficulty really makes these stealth systems feel better, the reason I would say something like Splinter Cell Blacklist and The Last of Us 2 have better stealth systems than all of the Arkham games except for maybe Arkham Knight. I would still say Splinter Cell Blacklist is better than Arkham Knight stealth, but Last of Us 2, it's a little bit more debatable for me due to the fact that Arkham Knight has a lot more creativity than Last of Us 2. But the reason I would put Last of Us 2 above every other Arkham game, and same with Splinter Cell, is because in Arkham, the risk of death when messing up is nowhere near the same level as it is in the other two games. In Arkham, messing up feels like, just a slap on the wrist because of the many escape options that Batman has. You have floor grates, you have wall grates, you have smoke bombs, you have your grapple hook, you have your batarangs. Like, there's so many different ways that Batman can avoid taking damage and avoid death. But in the other two games, it feels like what it is. If you get caught, it feels like getting shot in the head, for real.
Hey, look at Randy Orton slithering.
Watch out, watch out, watch out, watch out!
Because you will actually probably die a lot of the times. Like, especially in Last of Us 2, like, if you play that game on Grounded, or even the difficulty right under Grounded, if you're outnumbered, and mind you, a lot of the time in that game, you really don't have a lot of resources. You might have like 3 bullets to use in an encounter, so being stealthy is really important. And that's the kind of thing that adds stakes and really makes just stealth feel that much more engaging. But if Last of Us 2 and even Arkham or Splinter Cell and a lot of other different, like, really good stealth games that you could probably think of, if they don't have that level of engagement, they're really boring games. But now, let me move on to combat. In many different combat systems that I've played, I think there's a few different archetypes, and I'm gonna go through these archetypes and talk about what makes them fail. The first archetype is you have your flashy, really combo-focused combat systems, where it's more about comboing enemies without getting hit, or getting, a certain score, like DMC, for example. Other game examples are Spider-Man, Arkham, Sunset Overdrive, God of War 1 through 3, or for probably the most recent example I can think of, Ninja Gaiden 4. Now, in these types of games, there's a very fine line that has to be met because they are mostly power fantasy games, but they still need to feel engaging and fun. These games are less about being like really difficult, but they're more about being super engaging with the tools and the enemies that you can play around with. You can't just have a solid amount of variety like moves or tools that you can use in combat. You also need to have some form of engagement, otherwise it will get really boring. And a lot of that variety often tends to go to waste when your combat system is really easy because it just kind of disincentivizes people to even really want to care. But the kind of engagement I'm talking about can come in the form of enemy variety, needing to vary up your combos and moves to actually keep a high combo or take out certain enemies, and or having really engaging enemy designs that make you really need to pay attention to who you're targeting and who's around you as you're doing combos so that you don't lose it. I think all the games that I just mentioned are examples of combat systems that do this very well. And now you can by all means argue that, like, DMC is better than Spider-Man, or Spider-Man better than Arkham, or God of War better than Spider-Man. I'm not here to argue which one is better. I'm just saying I think all of these are good examples of combat systems that do this really well. But let's take a look at a couple combat systems that don't necessarily fail, but they also aren't the best. For the first example I would use like this, and this is not saying that Arkham has bad combat, but when you're playing Arkham and you're just fighting the normal enemies, the ones that don't have any weapons, and you can just kind of sit there and just spam square the whole time without really anything being that consequential, you might need to press triangle here and there. That combat is bad. Just straight up, it's really brain dead. But where Arkham makes itself a better combat system, and why it's not a bad combat system, it has people like stun guns, people like shield people, and brutes, where if you just keep sitting there spamming square, you're gonna lose your combo and you're gonna look like an idiot. But for my first real example now, Spider-Man Web of Shadows. Now, I know this game has a cult following, and I like the game too, okay? However, while I do enjoy the combat in this game, it's got some very glaring issues. The first being that the fact that the enemy engagement in this game is non-existent. Rarely will you ever die in this game or even feel like you are going to die in this game unless you're just astronomically bad at games. It almost feels like you have to purposefully try to die. This is not a good feeling. And on top of that, when you use the broken ass mechanic in that game that is the web strike, Enemies often die in 1 to 3 hits, so you really don't even need to use much of anything to, like, because that game has so much variety. But it's like when you have one move that's so easy to do, and you can use it however much you want, you can spam it and spam it and spam it. It's just like, a lot of the times it makes you feel like, why would I do all this extra shit if I can just, And don't get me wrong, it's still fun to combo people and use all the different variety in combat, but the enemies still die like super quickly. You feel too broken. So when you're fighting enemies who are largely non-threatening and they also die very quickly, you're not only losing the opportunity to string, multiple different combos together, but you can also kind of feel nothing while doing it. Web of Shadows on its highest difficulty feels like DMC5 and like, God of War on the lower difficulties. And I'm talking about, OG PS3 God of War. But the worst part is that even in those games on the lower difficulties, they still have better enemy variety and better enemy engagement than Web of Shadows does. The last game that I want to talk about when it comes to bad combat engagement is Zelda. And I'm talking about Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Now, at first glance, the way this game teaches you its combat, you would probably say it's very basic. And if you play it kind of how they teach you to play it, it is very basic. It's not very good. Generally, I would say that the combat system, when you play it like how they teach you to play it, it's like Elden Ring, but for babies. But as some of you who are fans of these games may have already guessed, the reason that these games are here right now is because there is a lot of creative things that you can do in the combat systems with these games. But that's kind of only if you push the games to their absolute limit, and only probably 10%, maybe 5 to 10% of Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild players actually play the game like that. But regardless of the fact, those games have a lot of creativity, which is why they're here. But the problem that I have with these games' combat system is, for one, there's not a lot of enemy variety, and the enemies that you do fight are some of the most unengaging things in the world. Again, they just don't feel like very threatening at all. You often find yourself just bullying everything with no effort, with very little risk of dying unless you absolutely suck. And this even goes for a lot of the boss fights in the game and mini bosses, unless you're just kind of under-leveled to fight them. That's really the only, and even then their moveset variety doesn't really change up much, if at all. It's just, oh, they hit harder and have more health. For reference, let me just play this TikTok that I made a while ago when I first played Tears of the Kingdom when it first came out.
This dude not only said that this game has better traversal than fucking Spider-Man, but I was also saying that the combat and the boss fights are fucking easy as shit. And I think if you're even remotely good at video games, you can agree with that. And I said the boss designs in this game really just aren't good for the most part. There's only like 2 sub-bosses, and every sub-boss in this game is just a reskin of each other. There's only like 7 different sub-bosses, and the rest are just reskins. But of the sub-bosses in this game, the only ones that I actually liked were the dragons and the Lynels. And there's about 3 main story boss fights that I like. But I said that for the most part, the bosses in this game are very poorly designed. They have very predictable moves. They are not very engaging, which makes them just not very fun, even if they aren't challenging. And again, they just aren't challenging. So to put this point on a fucking pedestal, I went to one of the reskinned main story boss fights, and mind you, this version of the boss fight is supposed to be harder than the regular boss fight from the main story. So I said, what will happen if I just sit here? How long will it take me to die if I literally just stand still? And this is what happened. Game of the year, by the way.
Mind you, that clip that I just showed was without me healing at all, which in those games, you can pause the game and heal. Like, it's the least threatening, least engaging thing in the world. This is the kind of combat system where I don't care how much creativity you have. If it's that unengaging, it's a bad combat system in my eyes. I'm not even saying mediocre, it's just straight up bad. Sure, the creativity element can be fun and it can be pretty unique with the things that you can do, but what does that matter if it's just you feel nothing when you're doing it? And that's ultimately where engagement and difficulty in these kinds of combat systems like Web of Shadows, like Arkham without, any special enemy types, like Tears of the Kingdom, like Breath of the Wild, that's ultimately where these systems could fail, or could fail would only be Arkham, do fail because of the engagement and difficulty within the combat system. But anyways, moving on to a different kind of combat archetype, you have Souls-like games, FromSoft game, where in these games, you don't have much in terms of actual moves. You have your light attacks, your heavy attacks, maybe you'll have a couple special moves with a specific weapon. Most of the time, you only have like maybe 6 to 8 different kind of moves that you have on hand that you can do at any given moment. It's not like DMC or Spider-Man or God of War where you have multiple different tools, like a lot more different tools that you can use on hand whenever you want. These combat systems, I think, live and die by the enemy designs, enemy variety, and their boss fights, of course. But like, just think to yourself for a minute, how boring would Elden Ring, Sekiro, Bloodborne, Lies of P? Think about how bad the combat systems in these games would be if their enemy design sucked. There wouldn't even be an ounce of like, because you know, creativity is not really a thing in these games. Like, you can get creative with your build, I guess, but you don't have much combat variety. Or even if the enemy designs weren't even necessarily bad. Think about if these games had the same kind of enemy designs as like, I don't know, Spider-Man or Arkham. Imagine if you put an Elden Ring character in the world of Spider-Man and they took how the combat scenarios are designed away and they made it, you know, more focused on 1-on-1 and 4-on-1 fights, which is kind of like maybe the max that you'll get in like a Souls-like game, like 4-on-1 type shit. But imagine you spend the whole game fighting like Spider-Man enemies with an Elden Ring combat system where you only have like 5 to 6 different attacks at your disposal. It's like, I probably wouldn't even be talking about Souls-like right now because nobody would give a fuck about these games. The gameplay would be so bad. I mean, the exploration would still be there, but there would be nothing else. But as I'm sure many of you are also aware, there's also the opposite problem that these games run into, and that's the game being too hard. And honestly, I don't think I really need to explain what I mean when I'm saying like, you know, they're too hard to the point where they're like just unfair. But just in case you don't really know what I mean, basically what I mean when I say a boss or something in a game is just kind of unfair is, let's say a boss or a certain level has like, you know, way too many enemies, or the boss has just like a crazy moveset that it's like, how do I even beat this? And the game doesn't really teach you organically how to handle something like that. Like, for example, in my Elden Ring video that I made, I would say like, oh, this boss is unfair, and someone in my comments would be like, oh, well, actually, you can beat this boss by getting this item from across the map and then going back and beating that boss. I'm like, bro, what?
And that's really the problem when you have people like this who are so delusional and hopping on cock.
Where did I ever get taught that in the game? How was I supposed to know that? Like, and I'm not saying that games need to tutorialize everything, but I do think that most things in a game need some kind of like way of the player organically figuring out how to complete something. Now, I would talk about turn-based combat system because it's actually kind of one of the motivating factors for making this video is actually Pokemon, but I'm not really going to get into turn-based combat because the only really turn-based combat system that I have played is Pokemon, but I've already made a video about the problems with every Pokemon game where I talk about the problems with Pokemon's combat system, so I've already went over that in a separate video, so there's really no point in me doing that. But regardless, the third and final archetype, and this is actually my favorite kind of combat system, that's combat systems like Jedi Fallen Order, Jedi Survivor, Stellar Blade, Sifu, God of War 4 and 5, and Hi-Fi Rush, which you could probably... Somebody would probably argue that Hi-Fi Rush should have been in the same category as like DMC, Spider-Man, Arkham, you know what I'm talking about. But personally, I think a lot of the there's a solid amount of enemies in Hi-Fi Rush that can really give you a solid challenge in a one-on-one fight. Whereas the other games, maybe a mini boss will, but like not with Hi-Fi Rush. But anyways, these are games that take the engaging enemy designs and variety of enemies in like a Souls game, for example, and they pair it with a combat system that has more move variety, combo variety, you know, more tools to play around with than literally any Souls game. But they also don't lean too heavily towards either side. You know, oftentimes they won't be as hard as a From Software or Souls-like game. At least for the most part, because you know, sometimes they can have like boss fights or certain sections where it's like, am I playing Elden Ring? But again, they're often not as hard. Maybe they don't have as many enemy types as a Souls-like game, but they will also have a bit less, you know, creativity and variety within combat as opposed to the more combo and, you know, creativity focused games like DMC, etc. But I think that every game I mentioned here meets a nice balance between the two previous archetypes that I mentioned. And simply put, I love them. Like, again, they're like my favorite kind of combat systems. And I find that it's often not the engagement or difficulty within these games that really affects their combat system, because it would be really hard to fuck that up. But then again, these combat systems are also really hard to design in the first place, and they put a lot of effort into them. But the thing that I think affects these types of games more than, you know, their combat is their story, optimization, music, visuals, level design. It's just every other thing except for the main gameplay thing. And speaking of level design, now that I've talked about combat and stealth, let's get into our other categories, because that's what they will fall under the level design portion of the video. Now, when it comes to level design, this is where I would kind of like to talk about puzzles and exploration, as well as platforming to an extent. To first talk about puzzles, I think games like Resident Evil 4, Silent Hill 2, Portal 1 and 2, Animal Well, and Uncharted 4, those are all examples of games that I think do puzzles in their linear level design really well, and they do a nice job of mixing puzzles into their already established main gameplay formula, whether it's shooting or combat, unless the game is Portal, which is, it's just basically puzzles the whole time. But when linear or even open world games for that matter have puzzles, and they're the kind of puzzles that you figure out and like you look at it and it's like, oh, I do this and I'm done. It's like you don't even, not even a thought really goes into it, you figure it out in 2 seconds. That kind of content does not feel good. That feels like a chore. There's nothing that made you think, there's nothing that really had you engaged. It's just you on autopilot being like, oh, I passed the first grade, that's how you do this. Like, for some examples of this, I'm gonna use like Batman Arkham, Riddler trophies, like the most iconic example of the most dog shit pieces of side content puzzles most of the time. Man, maybe you'll find an occasional Riddler trophy where it's like, oh, that was pretty intuitive, but like, how often do you really run into that kind of thing? Other examples would be the shrines from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Sorry to keep hating on the games, but they do have problems that people don't like to bring up. And then my final example, and it's probably another beloved one that people are not gonna like, Lego games.
Part of the script.
Now, in the past, whether it be my YouTube or on my TikTok, I've expressed that most of the puzzles that you find in those games, they again feel like busy work. And the reason I use these games as my primary example, like, or more so Zelda, is because in Zelda specifically, it's a very big focus in that game. Like, there is a lot of content that has to do with solving a puzzle. And I'm fine with not every single puzzle in a game being like the most thought-provoking thing like Portal, but when your content is filled with stuff that doesn't really engage the player in any kind of mental aspect or mechanically speaking, then it just feels like I'm playing a game made for babies. Like in Tears of the Kingdom or Breath of the Wild, when I was gonna make a video back in the day on Tears of the Kingdom, I had so many clips, probably over 50 clips, and I could have had more, of just me walking into a shrine and figuring it out in like under 30 seconds. And this isn't even mentioning the fact that in Tears of the Kingdom or even Breath of the Wild, there is multiple just repeat puzzles, like puzzles scattered around the map that it's just like, oh, it's just the same thing. It's like, it's like, what is the point of having a puzzle that's just a repeat? There's nothing really different about it. It's like, oh, I already know what I have to do. Maybe there's a longer path or something. It's just, it's so dumb. And this is why I hate a lot of the praise that the newer Zelda games get.
Are you retarded?
Because they do have such cool systems in place, maybe a little bit too many systems in place, which is why a lot of the puzzles do feel easy because you can do them in so many different ways because there's so many different tools to play around. This is not balanced very well, but assuming that you could balance that system very well, the systems in place could work really well for really good puzzles. But a lot of the time, those systems get overshadowed, and even the combat system, again for Zelda as an example, gets really overshadowed by how baby-fied it is, which then encourages other developers to be like, hey, that game got a lot of praise. Hey, we don't really need to try that hard. Maybe people are stupid and they can not solve these puzzles or some shit. I don't fucking know. You get what I mean. Or maybe you don't, and you do think that the Zelda games have really intuitive, engaging puzzles. My bad for calling you stupid, but like, I mean, come on, bro.
Stupid? You're calling me stupid? Hey, could someone who was stupid do this? I'm thinking about complex equation.
But now I'm going to talk about exploration, because this is another thing that I do think needs to have some form of engagement depending on how much, of course, a game focuses on exploration. But some games having a lack of exploration, even if it's not a focus, like a game being too linear, can also be a problem in my eyes. I'm going to use Final Fantasy 16 and Black Myth Wukong as my two examples here. I've made it no secret that I don't think Black Myth Wukong is that good. I think it's a decent game. I think it is severely overhyped. Final Fantasy 16 isn't crazy overhyped, but people do think it's a really good game. I think it's a solid game too. It has a really good story and combat's fun, but they both have level design that is way too linear. The best way to describe why these games have really boring, unengaging level design is that they feel like long hallways with like, you know, just a bunch of combat in between. It's like you're walking down a hallway and there's just a bunch of enemies to fight, and it's just that you fight a bunch of enemies and you get to the next boss. There's no thought into, oh, okay, how am I going to get there? What do I need to do? Is there a puzzle blocking my path? Is there a platforming section? Do this so that I can get to this area. You know what I mean? They have very little branching paths. And I'm not saying that every linear game needs to have super expansive level design like Bloodborne, Sekiro, Dark Souls. But when it literally feels like there's just nothing to figure out or just nothing blocking your progression at all, it just gets really boring. And then when it comes to like open world exploration, Assassin's Creed, probably the best example for this, or Ubisoft games in general, a lot of these games have pretty much all of their content just mapped on the map, and there's no organic exploration. This is one of the things that I talked about with Ghost of Yotei compared to Assassin's Creed. In Ghost of Yotei, literally basically every piece of side content in that game is something that you have to come across organically. It's not just going to be told to you, unless of course you get the Ainu, or is it the Ainu? It's the little songs that you find, and even the songs that you find, you have to explore to find those things. But like even the little songs, like it's not really, it's mostly just collectible stuff that it leads you to. Or Elden Ring, in another example, you have to organically find pretty much everything, which makes exploring these worlds feel really engaging. And that's not to say that, you know, if you have everything marked on the map, like you know, let's say Arkham or Spider-Man PS4, for example, all of their side content is just stuff that's marked on the map for you. And I'm not saying that, you know, marking things on the map automatically makes the content bad. But what I am saying is that getting to that content, like you can have really good content, and if you organically find it and it's really good, it's just that much better. And it just feels so much, yeah, just better. But to go back to linear games, for example, again, a lot of linear games can really benefit from having puzzles and platforming sections and multiple different branching paths to find, you know, whether it be collectibles or secret boss fights or different kinds of things. You know, the kinds of things that you find when you're exploring. Like Jedi Survivor, that's a game with excellent level design. That game has great exploration. It has hidden boss fights, hidden combat encounters, hidden, like, you know, just little funny interactions that you can find. It has a shit ton of platforming sections, puzzles. There's just so many things to do within the level design. Same with God of War 4 and 5. But like Jedi Survivor is my shining example of like one of my games with like some of my favorite level design ever. It's just traversing and going through the open zones that game offers. It's so fun. And I know I said that I would get into platforming, but I don't think I really need to get into platforming because I think I've kind of made my point with this video. To wrap this video up, I'm just gonna say one last thing and kind of summarize basically everything. Ultimately, having difficulty in a game is what makes it feel engaging. It's what I think separates the games that keep you hooked versus the games that you get bored of kind of quickly and you don't really want to spend numerous hours at a time on it. If a game can't meet a certain level of engagement, whether it comes through the form of one different, you know, gameplay style in a game, which I think is pretty bad. You need to have different kinds of gameplay variety in your game, but besides the point, whether it's one or multiple, then I think more often than not, it just leaves a bad taste in someone's mouth when they're finishing the game or even just going through the game. I mean, again, you look at a lot of side missions in a lot of Ubisoft games and they just are so clowned on for being such mediocre or bad content. It's just because when you have pieces of content that are just so mundane and there's literally nothing that's keeping you engaged and it just feels like you're going through on autopilot, it's just not good game design. And I will acknowledge there's always going to be two sides of, like, you know, people that play video games. There's two sides of the spectrum. There's going to be the people that are really bad at games and there's people that are like, they can hop on a game and like become the GOAT immediately. But generally, I do think that devs should try to aim somewhere. They should try to lean more towards the right side, but they should generally stay more in the middle as opposed to like more over here. Because even if you are new to games in general or new to just a genre of game, I think a lot of the thing, like in Souls-likes, for example, when I didn't like Souls-likes at first because I did find them to be really hard just for the sake of being hard. But when I started playing Sekiro was the first Souls game that I ever finished. When I kept overcoming challenge after challenge after challenge, and then I finally beat the game, I beat it and I was like, huh, you know, I see why people like these games. And it doesn't even need to be a game that's as hard as like a From Software game. Just having enough engaging, you know, gameplay systems or pieces of content in your game. The overall point I'm trying to get across with this video is that, to put it simply, easy games are not fun. Now I know what you're thinking. You could have just said that at the beginning of the video. But yeah, but I hopefully my explanations of different kinds of things in video games helps why I feel this way and how I feel this way. But yeah, Pokemon Legends EA was actually the game that motivated me to finally make this video, even though I felt like this for a while. But yeah, I can't stand really fucking babyfied easy games, and I just had to make a video about it. So maybe a game dev will see it probably not. I don't know. But I thank you all for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments. And yeah,